Hey everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. This is a lectionary podcast from the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm John Kennedy.
Okay, so today we have a passage that N.T. Wright, the great biblical scholar and bishop in the Anglican Church, says, far and away the most important passage about resurrection in the whole gospel tradition is the answer Jesus gives to the Sadducees question. So here we go. Here's the scripture. Luke 20, verses 27 to 38. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive. Okay, this is a passage that is the only direct discussion of the resurrection in Jesus' sayings, and it is in Mark and then Matthew and Luke, but for our lectionary, we get it once. We get only the Lucan version. So Luke's version, he has a bit of an apocalyptic addition about this age and the age to come, and the situation, of course, is the Sadducees. Those who do not believe in the resurrection are trying to trip up Jesus, probably the way the Sadducees always were trying to trip up the Pharisees, and they brings up the Levirate. Is that how you say it? Levirate?
I think it's Levirate, but I didn't look it up.
Yeah, the Levirate law, which is about marrying your brother-in-law if your husband dies to keep the family going. And Jesus' answer is that the question is irrelevant. They have missed because their presuppositions are wrong, because there is no death, there's no need for marriage. And in the end, he asserts the reality of the resurrection and that we will be like angels. So there it is, just to get us started, and much more to say, but okay, off to one of you guys.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I didn't know that N.T. Wright had said that this is the most important passage about resurrection in the gospel tradition, but I really like that because I was thinking, as I was reflecting on this passage, that this should come up in the lectionary every Eastertide, because it tells us a lot about certainly what Jesus thought resurrection was. So, it is a future thing, right? It's not a metaphor. It's defined in the sense that he can say that there's no marriage in the resurrection, right? Like we have the sort of life in the resurrection that means we continue as people in a certain sense. But more to say on that. I do want to come back around just to something really basic and mundane to begin with, and just kind of setting the scene more for this conversation, is who the Sadducees were. Right. And they were a group of aristocratic kind of elites in their day, in the Judaism of Jesus's time. And they consisted mostly largely of priests, but also other Jewish aristocrats. And they were closely linked with temple leadership. And unlike the Pharisees, who were much more aligned with Jesus in everything that's relevant to this passage, they seem to accept only the Torah, the so-called books of Moses, the Pentateuch, as authoritative, as scripture. And so therefore, they didn't feel bound by, let's say, what's written in the prophets or in anything else that we think of as being the Hebrew Bible, except those first 5 books. And so because there's no explicit, straightforward mention of resurrection in those texts, they did not adopt that idea. And likewise, in the Acts of the Apostles, it says they didn't believe in angels or in the afterlife. And so they were very conservative in this sense, that they accepted only these scriptures as authoritative. We're recording this podcast very late. So I had the benefit of reading Andrew McGowan's blog post, Substack, on this gospel text today. And he notes that the Sadducees are conservative in 2 ways. One is that they accept only the 5 books of Moses as scripture. There's sort of a religious conservatism there, but also in a social political sense, because McGowan notes that the hope of the resurrection is based on a sense, a belief, a conviction that something is wrong with the world as it is, that if God is a God of justice, then God must transform this world in some sense and vindicate or redeem the suffering of those who suffered unjustly, the suffering of the righteous in some way. And that's really what resurrection is about. The Sadducees are comfortable. They look around and think the world is pretty good, right? I'm in a comfortable place. I'm in an elevated place. I see no need for anything really to change. Yeah.
It makes me read this passage with new eyes just to hear that. And I think that the Sadducees, it's hard to know how we would know that they were so comfortable or sort of unanxious about needing to have a resurrection, if I'm hearing you right. But I do think they had a lot of anxiety about death, by asking this question to Jesus. And I don't think they genuinely want an answer from him. I think they're trying to trap him or sort of get him to admit that it's kind of pie in the sky to think that there's a resurrection. And by giving him this riddle to solve, they're smugly trying to prove their own point that there really is no resurrection. But I think that this passage addresses all of us who have anxiety and worry and uncertainty about our death and about what's afterwards. And, most people have some degree of that anxiety. And we're like the Sadducees in that regard. I think many of us are like that. We have to kind of solve for it, figure out what's going to happen then and what it's really going to be like. And for Jesus, he's so, all 3 Gospels have this text, all this kind of exchange, and it's always placed right before Jesus' own death. So I think, for Jesus to answer in this way, he's clearly so unanxious about the same things they're anxious about or preoccupied with. And this statement that God is not God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive. Some people might read that to say, well, you mean when we die, God's not our God anymore, But what he's really saying is there is no death that keeps God from us. Even death doesn't separate us from the love of God. And I think that's where Paul goes with it. And so it becomes a very beautiful, incredible answer, that he can brush it aside by saying, even Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are living in the light of God to this day. So I love this passage on the heels of our All Saints commemoration and All Souls, that, we're in the communion of saints. We proclaim this every Sunday, that we have the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins. It's part of our reality, whether we've internalized it or not. It's part of our proclamation. And this is kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting. John, you had said, how come we don't read this during the Easter season? I used to always think, why isn't this part of the lections set aside for burials, for funerals? And the kind of peeling back the layers, I think there's a few things in play. The first thing is that resurrection, life after death in heaven, are not all the same thing. And in time, those things have begun to be conflated. That we can see in the Hebrew Scriptures that there is evolution around the idea of what is resurrection. That and then Jesus' own resurrection breaks any Hebrew idea of resurrection. As you know, the Pharisees believed in the resurrection, but they believed in the resurrection of the dead at the end of time, not one person in the middle of time. And then Paul really is the one who speaks the most about the resurrection, followed by the Acts of the Apostles, and then followed by the Gospels finally. So the Gospels say actually very little about resurrection. And that as we move forward through time, we find that that resurrection, Jesus' resurrection, what we think of as resurrection, evolves in the Christian matrix of thought. And some of these things begin to be conflated. And people like Dante and Michelangelo have an enormous impact on how we begin to think of these things as we move into the Middle Ages, and that the Christian feelings about some of these issues get conflated and also reach beyond the boundaries of just the scriptures. I remember Rowan Greer, speaking of the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, used to say that Christian theology is like an enormous vacuum cleaner. It goes through the culture, it picks up everything, and then it takes what it wants and throws out the rest. And some of that has happened over the issues of resurrection. If we use a straight historical critical reading of the scriptures and look about what was believed about resurrection in Jesus' day, what's the polemic? Jesus is landing in a polemic here, right? As you've said, the Sadducees are those who don't believe in the resurrection. We learn about the Sadducees in the Gospels and in the Acts of the Apostles. And the Sadducees go away with the destruction of the temple. They're never heard from again. These were people who came down through the Davidic line, as you said, priests. And the Pharisees did believe in it. The Essenes believed certainly in there being two worlds, two ages. Maybe it was connected to the resurrection and maybe not. And all this stuff comes in, and our passage leaves out that at the end of the last two verses of the chapter that the scribes say to Jesus, "Good job, you're right, Master," right? And so I think that the Sadducees question there, I think they're trying to trap Jesus, just as usually we think of the Pharisees. And Jesus just cuts the argument off by saying, in Mark and Matthew, we get that more clearly, where he says, you don't understand the scriptures and you don't understand God.
Yeah.
There's more to say on that, but I don't want to talk the whole time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers to this thing.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you, as with the entirety of commentary, it seems, on this passage, that the Sadducees are not asking this question in good faith, right? There's the pretense of genuine debate, but they're trying to make Jesus's faith in the resurrection look foolish, reducing it to absurdity with this example of, what happens if you have this, married couple, no kids, man dies, husband dies, his brother marries her, no kids, and on, if all the brothers are dead. Who does she belong to in the resurrection? And Jesus says, they're fascinating to think about marriage in Jesus's consciousness anyway, as being linked to death and procreation, right? Yeah. That if in the resurrection there is no death, as Jesus claims here, then there's no need for marriage, which is not typically how we think about marriage and its value.
Anymore.
But something really, I think, worthwhile noting here that, again, I got from Andrew McGowan's comments on this, with regard to this matter of the Sadducees' comfort by virtue of their power and privilege in the world. The woman in this scenario, this imaginary scenario, she's just a prop, right? As a person, she doesn't really matter. She is merely a vessel for the continuation of this patriarchal line and household. So as it says in the Deuteronomy passage, that this practice is based on so that the name of the first man who dies may not be blotted out of Israel.
Right.
It's all concerned with men. And this is, I think, just a good example of how Jesus and his vision of the resurrection completely overturns these ways of relating man to woman, all sorts of power dynamics, just totally turned inside out. And the key element, I think, there is in the last verse that for God, all of them, he's talking about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of them are alive. And McGowan notes that this can also be translated, all live for God, and that in the resurrected life, our life is precisely a life that is referred to God, with reference to God. It's not just a life for ourselves to do what we want and have fun. It's a life for God and from God, and because God, is love, God is justice, and so on. All of the ways we mistreat each other don't stand, are just sort of canceled out and transformed.
Yeah, that's so well said. I really appreciate how Jesus specifies, they neither marry nor are given in marriage. And there's the nod to the women in the picture.
Yes.
And he takes his time to allow for that person also. So you're right. That's a really important point.
Yeah, that was a new point for me when I was, I as you could tell by the stack of paper I just completely dove into this passage, and I couldn't release myself. It was new to me that this was about liberation of the woman, of women, not the woman, but of women. I thought it was really interesting. Okay, I want to bring you through N.T. Wright's thoughts here, okay? Because I still have way much more to say, but let me tell you what this guy says, since I spent so much time plunging into this. This is what I did yesterday on my day off. Okay, you ready? N.T. Wright takes a very historical, critical reading of the text, and it says that we've assumed for centuries in Western Christianity that the ultimate point of being a Christian was to go to heaven when you die. And that he noted that in history, the Roman Catholics inserted a lag time known as purgatory, which I grew up thinking about, except for the most holy. That this picture greatly remains, that heaven is where God and the angels live, and the dead go in the hereafter. Reformers challenged the justification, and they challenged purgatory, but they did not challenge that the ultimate purpose was to go to heaven. And this was, as he said, reinforced by Dante and Michelangelo. That's where I got that news. And today there's still this belief that Jesus is in heaven and we're going to go be with him, and that there's a conflation of life after death and going to heaven. Now, heaven for Christians and Jews assume is populated by angels. Some assume the dead have become angels. Many think that that's what's happening in this passage. And N.T. Wright points out that Jesus, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and ordinary Jews and pagans of his time would not have thought such a thing. So first century Jews did not think of heaven as the destination. Few supposed human beings would become like angels, and no one supposed resurrection meant life after death. Jesus did not go to heaven in the resurrection. That was a separate event with the ascension. And so what he is trying to say is that this passage, strictly speaking, in its historical locale, is something very different than the way it's interpreted now. Mm-hmm. And that resurrection, in the Pharisaical understanding of things, and the rabbinic understanding is we were all trained because we spent a lot of money to go to seminary, was that there was the feeling that when you died you went to Sheol. Sheol was not hell at this stage. Sheol was this place where the dead go and they somehow live there, and that after that there would be this resurrection. And then there's some differing opinions about what that resurrection looks like. But there was like this great place in which the dead hang out, which was below where we live now, right, in this sort of sandwich view of things. And so what N.T. Wright is trying to talk about is that we have to be very careful about how we use the passage, and that he would say that to be like angels, that's about immortality. That's about not going to a place where there is no death, as you guys are referring to. But it doesn't mean that ontologically we become like angels, or that even in location we become like that. So and he argues very strongly about this. And there's pushback against him in that world too. But that's his thoughtfulness on this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, Jesus says they are like angels and are children of God.
Right, he does say
it's
that.
Right there in the text. Yeah. So it's hard to argue with that. But
he's arguing with what does that mean?
I see.
That's not the text.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I've been paying attention to N.T. Wright for a very long time, and not claiming to be an authority, but just to say that he's been very influential on how I think about resurrection. And so many elements of the Christian life. And, I think when we think about resurrection, when we think about what is the end point, what is the sort of omega point that we look to and hope for as Christians, and why isn't it just going to heaven? And I think the answer to that, at least a good place to answering that, a good place to begin answering that, is to remember, who God most primarily is in the scriptures. With relation to creation, God is the creator. God created the world, Genesis chapter 1, right? Calls it good. And I think the sense of resurrection is that God, as the creator, the good creator of this good world, is not abandoning the world to sin and decay and so on, but that God has the ultimate purpose and commitment to redeeming and restoring this physical, created, good earth. And so therefore, the ultimate destination is a renewed heavens and a renewed earth, right? As the vision at the end of Revelation puts it, which has not human beings ascending to be in some disembodied spiritual plane, as I think most Western religious people, monotheists anyway, kind of imagine it, but rather the city of God in some sense, the New Jerusalem, as it's called in Revelation, coming down from heaven to join the earth, and that is really the vision. And I think, just to sort of get a little into the particulars of, what that means for like life after death, going to heaven, et cetera. Like what happens when we die now, since the resurrection, looking around, hasn't happened yet, and we can't expect to happen, for some time. What happens to the people we love who die now? Like, what is their experience like now? This is such a valid question for us as parish clergy, right? We're dealing with people who are dying all the time. We're dealing with people who are bereaved all the time. And we need to be able to offer sort of a word of hope and consolation to them. I mean, in my experience, saying like, well, at the end of history, God will raise up your dearly beloved from the dead. As for what's happening to them right now, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. That doesn't really fly, right? So we need something for them now. And I think the scriptures have that, right? Like St. Paul, who writes so much about resurrection in the sense that we're talking about it, I believe, also says that if I die, I will go be with Christ. So there still is this sense of an intermediate stage, not of purgatory so much as this spiritual communion and dwelling with God in the heavenly realm. But that is not yet the final stage in the journey, right? The final stage in the journey is resurrection. Somehow a renewed earth and material existence in some way.
Yeah, wow, that's a big answer.
It is, and it's so different than how people think about it.
Yeah, I don't really think about it that way. I've never had a sense of a future resurrection for all that, we're sort of waiting for that in some way. I have a sense of God as presence, Jesus mentions Moses at the burning bush. I mean, at that scene, God says, I am who I am. It's a present tense being. And I feel like, to be in relationship with that God and to be in God and for God and of God and our lives hidden with Christ in God, that sort of language. Death is just it's an event, but I don't think it changes our grounding in this presence, this divine presence. And so if people are anxious about what happens when they die or when their loved one dies, the way we talk about the dead is that they are, they're God is of the living, and they're all living. We're living, we're all in communion. There's a spiritual transcendence to everything physical and temporary about our lives. And the cruciform shape of, our lives are linear, but we live always vertically, and we just move vertically through the timeline, but we're always connected, and I don't feel like death is really that much of an event, to be honest. I feel like it's just sort of a blip where we continue on in some other way. It's like a rebirth. And so I don't have anxiety. I don't have any imagination of what that must be like, but the anxiety around death, I think, is what Jesus is always trying to quell, and that his presence on earth was to reveal our participation, our preoccupation with death that keeps us from life, life in God, life in the kingdom of God, moving into the great banquet feast, the joy of being in God now. I think that is the hard work that Jesus challenges his disciples to do.
Yeah, interesting. I am preoccupied by death, and I think about it all the time. I feel like I spend...
Your own, or just in general?
I mean, if you had to knock out, if you did a time calendar about how I've spent my time in the last 4 or 5 months,
wow.
unbelievable amount of time with people who are dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I almost cannot think of a time when I wasn't working on something I was going to say at somebody's funeral. And I think I've spent 30 years working on this too. So I am preoccupied by death, but I am occupied by it in a way that I hope has moved toward a transformation. So not so much death as the end, but death as part of a continuum. And not only a continuum that if you have eyes, depends on how you're driving. Like if you drive right over the head of your car, you only see the road right in front of you. But if you lift up your eyes to the horizon, you can drive differently. Mm-hmm. And that's what Jesus is calling us, to lift up our eyes to the horizon. And so therefore, to see the continuation of the life and the divine being of light, life, and love, we can live in a different way here and now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the super empowering thing about this. And that so much of the scriptures, and I point a little bit more to you, Elizabeth, than to John and to Justin before that. You have spoken a lot about something you've just referred to. The Lord's Prayer, it says, on earth as it is in heaven, right? And so much of the scriptures, and you're referring to the end of the book of Revelations, of this coming downness to us, to use a metaphor. But I think this word is particularly important to us because this is about almost like a going upness, where when Jesus refers to the angels, so referring to we might call a different dimension here. And it's not clear that Jesus adds anything new, if you really plunge into this, to what's already in the scripture. So we read in our wisdom literature, we did it on Sunday in Evensong, the souls of the righteousness are in the hands of God. We see at the Transfiguration that Moses and Elijah show up. They already have life. And now Jesus says to us that we're going to be like angels. Well, what are angels like? We believe the biblical witness. Speaking of, Jane Williams wrote a beautiful book about angels and the biblical witness to angels, that they live close to God, that they have spiritual bodies, going back now to 1 Corinthians 15. They have this sort of spiritual body, something of what Paul is trying to talk about, maybe different than the spiritual bodies that we get as the communion of saints or in the company of heaven, but that we will live in the near presence of the divine, more intense experience of this continuum, Elizabeth, that I think you're talking about. And when I had the opportunity to go on sabbatical and to travel and to speak to great religious lights, I asked every single one of the people I spoke with about what they thought happened after death. And it was very interesting when I asked Rowan Williams what he thought happens after you die. He immediately referred to, drum roll please, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so I bring that up because I think that our continuing understanding of what happens after you die is that I would say that we can say that we do live in the near presence of the light, life, and love, but that the journey continues. Origen says that we shall spend an eternity trying to come to know an infinite God. And that is what I believe, and that we will have service to do, because angels are, angel means messenger, that we will have service to do in the divine dimension here. Mm-hmm. So I'm with you, this idea that we're just going to say, sorry that Willie died, and at the end of time, you're going to see him again. Our own devotional life doesn't have that as a part of it. And I do believe this question is an enormous part of our calling, which is to care for people who are dying, but also not to fixate on it like the whole purpose of your life is to go to heaven. I think that's a ridiculous idea. and it's to give up the treasure that this life is, which is the purpose of this life, is to live completely fully alive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just finished, a few weeks talking about Bob Marley to some of our parishioners, who of course was a Rasta man. And, there's so much I love about the Rasta way, which is so much closer to Christianity than most people realize. Like, it's very close, actually. The key difference is actually they believe that Christ came again. But they believe in Christ, they believe in the scriptures, they believe in the whole view of the world and of God and of humanity and the everything, as far as I can tell. So, Rastas are very clear, and Bob Marley is very clear that God's greatest gift to us is life. And life is for living. Life is for being fully alive. And this is why they eat such a clean diet, mostly vegan. Bob Marley was always moving his body, like got up early to run like every day. So you can take care of your temple and live, right? And that's what it's about. It's about living. And so this faith in the age to come and the afterlife and the resurrection, which can be conflated in unhelpful ways, but ultimately are of a piece, right? We're talking about what is our ultimate hope and so on. It's all based on, in this view, the idea that God's gift to us is life, that God is life. And in creating us, God calls us into that life. And that life never ends. So if we stay close to God, if we stay in that life and love, then we'll never die in a certain sense. There'll be these transitions, but we never really die. And I think pastorally, practically, to me, that's the most important thing about all of this. I have something funny to say.
Oh, can I just say before you get to the funny thing?
I am add it before we close.
I am so with you about that. I think that for people who have transcendent visions, whether or not it is of the light, for instance, they always experience plugging into a thing, an energy source that vivifies their life in a way that they just don't even know what to do with it. And I think that the very question of all sentient beings, the creation, Elizabeth, you bring to the conversation all the time, that this is life. That is what the divine being is, but it's not just life that's like neutral energy like electricity. It's life that is love. And Elizabeth, you preached the other day, and you said something. You said, I'm just going to have a conversational sermon. I mean, you said something that to my mind was so beautiful. You talked about the golden rule, and you talked about Jesus moving it to golden love. In golden love, I think there should be many books, those who write books called Golden Love, because golden love in my mind is filled with the life that is full of love, this divine thing. And that is what happens in Jesus' resurrection, is all that stuff starts to burst forth. So the new age that comes is that Jesus brings this new age. I mean, the new age, when you get into the two ages, he starts it off with his resurrection. And therefore, the whole question of life, the continuum of life after death, bursts further onto the scene as he bursts back into this life. And that's what the resurrection of Jesus brings us, this ability for us to like get a hold of this thing, or to get caught up in this thing, not to get a hold of it, but to get caught up in it in a new and different way. That's what then it makes the Sadducees look as though they are the blindest of religious leaders, because they thought the whole thing was just this little box, and after you're dead, it was, in the ground, see you dude, all over.
Well, they do go away saying they're never going to ask him a question again. That's the next verse. They never ask him any more questions. So... Yeah.
On this question of marriage and how long does marriage last? Does it continue into the afterlife? Last week, when I was first starting to think about this passage, I thought about an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And in it, Larry and his then wife, who is not his real wife, but even in the show, they get divorced because he's insufferable. Anyway, in the show, they're coming up on 10 years of marriage, going to celebrate that anniversary with the renewal of vows. And so Cheryl, Larry's then wife, writes some vows, and she's going over it with him. And she says something about, their marriage continuing for all eternity. And he's like,
I thought this was over at death. I didn't know we went into eternity together. Isn't that what it said in Till Death Do Us Part? I thought it was...
Do you have a problem with eternity?
Well...
We finally found each other, Larry, and we're celebrating this for all eternity.
I guess I had a different plan for eternity. I thought I'd be single.
And this becomes a huge problem for them. And then in real life, I was at a wedding this weekend, and it was, a non-religious ceremony officiated by a judge. And a lot of it was, not from our prayer book. A lot of it was not our language. They borrowed some of it, including, the vows to love and to cherish and for sickness, in sickness and in health, for better, for worse, etc. And then they added for all eternity, which is absolutely not in our liturgy, because that's the opposite of what Jesus says here.
Well, and we say until we are parted by death.
Yeah, we say until we are parted by death. And I found this so not only amusing, but also fascinating, because God was not referenced once in the ceremony. So people are okay dropping God, but we're so, I think, fixated to your point, Elizabeth, on death and so on, that there's this need to sort of smuggle that in, even when it's not traditional. Mm-hmm. And, I say that with a lot of sensitivity and compassion, because I think about oh, wow, even with the hope for life everlasting and so on, there are things about this life that end and really end. And our marriages are, according to this, are one of them. Mm-hmm. And that's something a reminder to really, really fully inhabit the time we have and the relationships we have, and really treasure them, because even as they will continue, they will change, and certain things about them, this passage is telling us, I think, will end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what doesn't end in a death is love. I mean, that's the part that we're practicing in a marriage or in a relationship, that, it's like our workshop to become better lovers, better, more committed, more unconditional givers of love and receivers of love. And I think that a lot of people think marriage is the end all, the ultimate achievement in life, and, the ultimate arrival into meaning and purpose and value. And so to put all eternity on it is wow. But, I think that people lose sight of the fact that it's a small microcosm of the great love we're called into, in all of our relationships, and ultimately in the relationship with our Creator, that we're only expanding. And so to be, freed of your marriage, not really freed, but, to both of you move beyond it together in the great love. I mean, what could be better? It's also a beautiful thing to kind of expand your household into all of creation, It's the ultimate eternal love.
Yeah, wow, it's really interesting. Love the current wedding. I thought you were going to go in a different direction, because when I was a boy, when my mom was in graduate school, I went to a wedding, and I can still remember it was in Cooperstown in this Victorian house, and when they exchanged vows, the vows were until love doth do us part. Until love ends, or something like that. No, it was until they were getting married, until love ended. Well, my father thought this was the funniest thing he'd ever heard.
Love doth part us?
Yeah, no, till love ends, or something like this. So that, and so I can remember, as my mother was talking to their friends, my father looking out over whatever the lake in Cooperstown is, laughing out loud, that was some vow. We're good to go as long as love shall last. That's what it was. Anyway. But anyway, also this whole issue of marriage here, and I know, Rob, we have to wrap it up. We're at about 89 minutes here, which was marriage in Jesus' day in antiquity was different than marriage as it is in the Western tradition that we live in now. Much more like arranged marriages per se, as you might get in traditional aspects of India. And these are marriages that, are doing a different sort of communal business, not just a personal business. Anyway, we have talked and talked and talked, and hopefully you're not confused when we're done, which we're finally coming to the end for. We are grateful to you. We love it when you respond to what we have to say, good, bad, or indifferent, or you send our stuff to somebody else, so we continue this midrash on this passage that, N.T. Wright in particular was really calling our attention to. So God bless you. Peace be with you. And thanks for hanging in with us. Take care. Bye-bye.